Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor, Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker. In last week's podcast, we talked with Dan Wells, publisher at the nationally known Windsor Press, Biblioasis, and heard some of his reflections upon marking 15 years in Canadian publishing. This week, you'll hear some of the readings from new works and stories about the early days of the press that were shared at Biblioasis' 15th anniversary party. It was a wonderful evening with top literary talents from Ontario, Montreal, and the U.S. We hope you enjoy it.
I used to teach undergraduates, and they were less noisy. Good evening. Welcome, and thank you for coming. As I have learned everything I know about publishing from Dan Wells, I'm only a little bit embarrassed to steal one of his favorite lines, which is, "The root word of publishing is public, and without you and your incredible taste in books, we wouldn't exist." Thank you for your steadfast support of this house. My name is Vanessa Stauffer, and I'm the managing editor, and I'm a fairly recent addition to Biblioasis. I can take no credit for anything you see here tonight, but I still feel very proud. So we have a number of guests here tonight, launching their fall and late summer books. We also have a few surprise guests. We also have, what some of you may know, is the 30th birthday celebration of Dan Wells. We're celebrating that this week as along with our 50th anniversary. There you are. He hates this. Okay. So I would like to propose a toast. One of the most valuable things that I have learned since I started working at Biblioasis is that publishing isn't only the promotion of art, but it is its own kind of art. Having subscribed for many years to Leo Tolstoy's philosophy of art, I understand art to be an act of courage and faith, of selflessness and generosity, an endeavor undertaken on behalf of another, on behalf of the good of us all, an act of love. And this means that Dan Wells is one of the finest artists I've known. To Dan and what he's made here for all of us, and to the next 15 years. You're almost done with me, don't worry. One more. I have one more paragraph. Speaking of artists, one of our very special guests tonight is another person who's been with Biblioasis since the very beginning, without whom we would not exist. So I would like to invite to the stage to introduce our first official reader, who is Martha Wilson, our fiction editor, our sage, our author, our writer of letters and sender of excellent jazz, a giant of Canadian fiction, John Metcalf.
Good evening, everybody. I'm honored to be here to celebrate Dan's achievements. They truly are extraordinary. And so I thought I'd recount an anecdote about the time when we first met. Dan had been running a literary festival in Windsor, and it invited me down to read, and met me at the airport with a bottle of scotch. And I thought, the literary life is at last beginning to look up. The attendance at the festival was not all that Dan had wished for, and he was a little bit down in the mouth afterwards. And we went out together drinking scotch. And he told me that preparatory to my coming down to do a reading at the festival, he had read a book by me. And I thought, what astonishing courtesy and politeness when you recall that, for example, very, very few publishers actually read the books that they publish. The last publisher I worked for said he got a general impression of them watching the sheets go through the press. And I was always rather taken with the anecdote, apparently absolutely true, of the author Norman Sherry, who wrote the biography of Graham Greene, and was touring in the United States, publicizing the book and being interviewed left, right, and center by local radio stations and wherever he could promote the book. And one of these smaller stations, seconds before they were to step into the recording booth where the thing was going to be going out live, it wasn't being recorded, the chap said to him, could you give me some idea of what the book's about? I didn't have time to read the blurb on the jacket. So when Dan said to me that he had actually read something that I had written and that, he had been moved by this to a series of thoughts which we began to explore as the evening went on and the level in the bottle of whiskey went down. And eventually he said to me, what I really want to do is, I'll always be a bookseller, but what I really would like to do would be to get into publishing. And would you be prepared to help me? Well, I was in a position to do that because I had a lot of writer friends. And I looked at him and I thought, this guy is really one of the most interesting people that I've met in many, many years. And intelligence coming out of his ears. And plus, I really, really liked him. I thought, this man is a really nice person. And yes, I would like to help him. I may have been slightly pissed at the time. But, so I said to him, with considerable sincerity, I can help make you into the best small literary press in Canada. And he looked at me and he said, I don't want to be the best small literary press in Canada. And I sort of looked at him and I said, well, and he said, I want to be Andre Deutsch. And I thought, here's my boy. And now here he is with a Booker short list and wonderful writers stacked up left, right, and centre. And so I think he has actually achieved, more than achieved, what he set himself out to do 15 years ago. So my pleasure and my gratitude to him for the opportunity to be his friend and to work with him. It's my pleasure to introduce the first of the readers this evening, Martha Wilson. And I need to say a few things about Martha's work, because you've never met anything quite like it before. And I had never met anything quite like it before. And when I started to read this collection of stories that she'd sent to me, I began to think, what do these remind me of? Not in a direct way, but there's something about them that reminds me of first James Thurber. Martha, please come up and entertain us with what you are going to do. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm so happy to see John. I didn't know he was going to be here. I saw him with this, that mixture of real excitement and joy and also horror. Because, John, I know I owe you that letter, and I think about it, I swear, every day. And I'm sorry. But it's wonderful to see John, and I know he has many, many fans in this room, and deservedly so. And thank you for what you said about Dan, and filled in so many of the chinks in the knowledge that a lot of us have of Dan. It's really interesting to hear that, and I love those poems. I'm going to read a bit tonight from my collection, Nosy White Woman. It took me 20 years to write, so I'm very happy to have it out in the world. A lot of people ask me about the title, Nosy White Woman. That's the title story. My story, The Golden Bra, was going to be the title story, and Dan asked me a few months ago about changing it from The Golden Bra to Nosy White Woman, which is a story about white privilege, and it's about the need for white people to pay attention when calling the police to report some very tiny incident involving a person of color, and how quickly that can go off the rails, especially in the United States, which is where I'm from. So that's the title story. But I was interested in using Nosy White Woman because when I was in my mid-20s, I read a story in Harper's Magazine by Jane Hamilton. It was called Rehearsing the Firebird. And the protagonist is a young, maybe high school girl. She looks in the mirror one day and she sees herself, a skinny white girl. And that sentence, that phrase, I just found electrifying, because I can't remember ever before having the experience of reading about a person who was white, who was acknowledging her whiteness in a story that was not about race. And I realized we can do this all the time. I can do this in my writing. White doesn't have to be the default. It doesn't have to be the invisible piece that we always go back to. So in these stories, I mentioned a number of times when people are white, and it was something that we kind of adjusted a lot. John and I talked about it, and I think there are maybe 8 mentions throughout the book. But that's where the title story comes from. And I'm going to read a bit from my story, The Pritzker Prize live stream. This is about a teenage girl who has a big sort of kind of career crush or intellectual crush on the architect Rem Koolhaas. She's very interested in his work and has persuaded her mother to let her learn a lot about buildings and take in all these things around seeing his buildings. She's especially interested in the CCTV tower in China, which is a Rem Koolhaas building. And her mother thinks that she wants to be an architect, but that turns out not to be the case. I've never wanted to be an architect. What? What are you talking about? What's the past year been about? Not becoming an architect. Is that what you thought? Well, yeah, Teresa said. I mean, is that the only reason you tried to be nice about it? Because you wanted me to do that? I thought that was your goal. Your dad did too. That's why he paid for you to attend the conference in Quebec, so you'd have a better chance to study that building. I didn't know Dad paid. Did Dad spend too much money? Ruby, don't get all worked up. How much did it cost? Was it too much money? It's fine. No, it's fine. I found out after we got back from the conference. Your dad did it to surprise you because he thought, and I did, that it was your career goal. Is that what you want? You want me to be an architect? Are you going to be disappointed in me if I don't decide to do that? Because I don't think I could. Wasn't that what you've been planning all this time to do when you grow up? No, Mom, not at all. You can just like things. I like Harry Potter, but I don't want to be a wizard. So, maybe it wasn't the buildings Ruby was so drawn to, but innovation, newness, change. Or perhaps it was about being creative and having agency, being in charge. Maybe she envied the sureness, the ability to bring projects to fruition. Or possibly she was attracted to the idea of people who thoroughly enjoyed their careers. Not like a soil analyst and a family practitioner whose job hadn't ended up being quite what he pictured. They ate their waffles on the sofa. Is Dad going to be disappointed in me if he finds out I don't want to be an architect? No, honey, I don't think so, Teresa said. Why had she assumed architecture was Ruby's career goal? Partly, Teresa thought, because it was such a reflexive inquiry for adults to pester kids with, this "what do you want to be when you grow up" business. But part of it was on her, getting sucked into a simplistic assumption without nuance, without questions. She had been oblivious of complexity, as if Ruby were an idle acquaintance, rather than the person deserving of Teresa's finest, most granular attention, her care. A bit later, Teresa would wonder whether one function of Ruby's interest in Rim House and buildings had been to provide a focus for her admiration, an area that she deemed on her own to be worthy and solid. Though her daughter generally behaved respectfully toward people, Teresa got the sense that Ruby had an uneasy relationship with her own rearing contempt, trying to stuff it down and keep it from getting out of hand. Watching Ruby, Teresa found that she could remember the pulse of her own high school years, how she and her friends used to alternate between fiery scorn and regret that they were being mean. No one had been safe from their scathing judgment, which was based mainly on disappointment and got divided impartially among parents, teachers, classmates, relatives, famous people, and passersby. Perhaps Ruby had found herself pinched in that same uncomfortable trap. Here, though, in these ambitious structures, in the craggy and avuncular face shown in the photos of Rim House, and in the careful work of his partners on their projects across the globe, she had identified an appropriate channel for her enthusiasm. Here was something that merited her meticulous alertness, untainted by scorn, still enviable. Her devotion had been an edifice she created on her own. What a relief it must have been to her, finding an outlet both real and remote, a safe place for all that fierce love to land.
And our next surprise guest is Mr. Mike Barnes.
I have an artifact to help me with this. Do you recognize this, Dan? I'll get to that in a minute. I guess I came in just after, to Biblioasis, just after John, and not quite bedrock, I guess that's John and Dan, but a fossil pretty close to that layer. And the way I remember it coming about was John phoning some of us who were leaving or being left by, I guess, that other publisher, the one that didn't read and hasn't been named yet. I remember it sort of as an ARC situation, although that doesn't quite work because there were no pairs, just individuals being offered a place on it, and I was very happy to be offered a place, especially when a flood was the alternative. There are so many memories I have of the last 15 years with Dan. So many conversations. We've shared a lot of laughs. We've shared a few tears. But I kept coming back to a memory from very early on, before my book came out, which I think was the second or third book by Biblioasis. And Dan emailed me and said that he was correcting the proofs of my book while he was rocking Emerson's Cradle. And obviously emailing me at the same time. I don't know if Alexis was aware of, quite that degree of multitasking that was going on. But I found it pretty staggering. But also an advance taste of just the number of gifts and dedication and energy and intelligence that Dan has always brought to what he's been doing with Biblioasis. And it wasn't too long after that he told me, just to extend the multitasking, that he was binding a book for me himself. He mentioned a workbench, and I think he mentioned a garage or a basement, I'm not sure, but there was a workbench, and he was actually doing it. And sure enough, he sent it to me a little bit later. This is my book, Catalogue Raisonné, a mystery novel published with Biblioasis, but this is the version that Dan actually made for me. Well, I don't think you make so many books on a workbench anymore, Dan. I'm not sure. You haven't made one for me in a while. But what that meant to me and still means to me is that Dan brings that human side of publishing and has never lost that, along with all his obvious skills at building the best press in Canada, and no need to put a small in front of that as far as I'm concerned. When I was first starting out writing in my 20s, I did a little kind of time travel experiment the other day, and I was just wondering if I went back and talked to that man and asked him what kind of rewards he thought he might get from writing, other than the writing itself, what he might have said to me. And the answers came back pretty easily, but one thing I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have said was the chance to meet good people, which to me just shows how ignorant I was at the time, because now I would put that right near the top of the list. And I would put Dan at the top of the list of people who have helped me see that. So thank you, Dan. It's my pleasure to introduce Catherine Leroux. I'm very excited to hear her read from Madame Victoria. We haven't met before, but I did a little sleuthing and digging, so I'd like to fill in a little bit of what I learned about Catherine. Catherine Leroux was born in Quebec, studied philosophy, has worked as a journalist and a translator. And as a translator, she was shortlisted for the 2018 Governor General's Award for translation from French to English, Mark Fruitkin's novel. Sorry, of course, yeah, English to French, and it was Mark Fruitkin's novel. Since 2011, she's published 3 of her own books, all highly acclaimed and all either winning prizes or being shortlisted for major prizes. Her first novel, La Marche en Forêt, I don't think that's translated into English, no. However, her second novel was, and in its English appearance, called The Party Wall, it was a finalist for the 2016 Scotiabank Giller Prize. Her most recent book, Madame Victoria, which appeared in English version in 2018, interestingly doesn't carry the words novel or short stories as you would usually find somewhere on the cover of a work of fiction, but inside, on the title page, it has the word variations. That intrigued me the first time I saw it. In an interview that I read, Catherine Leroux said that Madame Victoria was inspired by a true story of a woman's skeleton found near the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal and dubbed Madame Victoria. This interview quotes Catherine as saying, quote, "The book is a collection of hypotheses about who the woman might have been and how she ended up dying so alone in downtown Montreal." When I read that, it seemed to turn the usual crime story inside out, because usually what you get is an investigation that may start with open doors, but closes them one by one until only one person is left standing, and that's the only person that could be left standing. This seems to me to do the opposite. It's an exploration that opens doors one by one to many possible people and perhaps many possible perpetrators. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Leroux.
I'm now going to read a short excerpt from Madame Victoria. It is the last story and the last hypothesis about the real Madame Victoria. It is truly the last door, the last woman standing, as you said earlier. But don't worry, I'm not revealing any sort of punchline. It's just the end. All the women in my family are called Victoria, including me. It's not my real name. I was born in the Great Flood. The whole lower city, its fringes and underskirts, drenched. Notre-Dame Hospital, flooded. Saint-Luc Hospital, flooded. My mother had to walk north, up to the Royal Victoria, where her waters broke to. I was born when the first sign came of the end of the world, and I did not cry. I opened my eyes, and a shout of victory went up. I grew up quietly, refusing to take the breast, sleeping with one eye open, avidly savoring the caresses of the reprieve. I had teeth before everyone else. Now I'm 7 years old and standing ankle deep in water. 7 years of reason, of resignation. I live surrounded by many brothers and sisters, too many to count, and none of this will prevent my already charted future. I will die alone on earth. They call me Victoria the same way they say, my girl, little one, a woman. It doesn't matter. Soon there will be no one left to utter my name. At the hour of my death, I won't try to speak. I'll have nothing to say about the world, about what I learned here. I do my best not to draw lessons, not to become wiser. I want to have nothing to pass on. When the time comes, I won't struggle. There will be trees that are too young and a leaf-covered ground, nothing grand, nothing solemn. I'll be calm and silent. I'll be a grave that can't hold down what doesn't die. I'm called Victoria, but that's not my real name, because every name they give me is wrong. I have all the names of the world, the words of everyone who lived before me. I'm called mystery, pain, sometimes verdict. I'm an axe, a bomb armed and loaded, an arrow pointed at the last words of the story. I am courage, vestige, bridge. I am light. I call myself victory as in the final, the last survivor. My name is love and war. My name is Eon. I'm an eternity. I'm everything and then nothing. Thank you so much.
I'd like to welcome Mr. Craig Pearson.
Well, first of all, what a great event. Great turnout, 15 years Biblioasis. I'm Craig Pearson with the Windsor Star. As I often said when I was doing signs for the first From the Vault, I learned a lot from writing. And I think what I learned the most, and what I learned about Dan, and therefore quality work, is that after all the mornings and the evenings and the weekends and the vacation time you spend writing this when you're not at work, and you finally submit the last chapter, your publisher will add another. And I think the most important thing that I learned about that was, yes, it makes sense. That's what quality work is about. You have to have the passion, the desire, and yes, the work ethic to produce it. And Dan showed me that, yeah, we're going to produce something good here, but it's going to take work. I'm very happy to say that the first From the Vault became the fastest selling book in Windsor history. Thank you very much for that, Dan. Thank you for taking me on. So I would like to toast Dan, and I would like to toast him for his commitment to the written word, and also for providing something to Windsor that I don't think we would have had. I mean, this guy is a legitimate Giller Prize nominee, on and on, a complete artist. He is truly a Windsor gem, in my opinion. We're glad to have you. So, very importantly, here's to Dan and the great work you do. And now to introduce the next author. I will try to read this as best I can from the printing. Grescoe is going to be reading from Possess the Air. He is the author of 7 non-fiction books, including Sacre Blues, The End of Elsewhere, The Devil's Picnic, Bottom Figure, Step Hanger, and Shanghai Grand. He's won some prizes: the Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction, the Mavis Gallant Prize for Nonfiction, and was a finalist for the William Saroyan International Prize for Writing. He's also contributed to a few small publications like the New York Times, the Guardian, the New Yorker, Gourmet, and the Wall Street Journal, although I can't help but notice he is not in the Windsor Star. His books have been translated into half a dozen languages, and what I think is cool is he writes nonfiction, the same as I do, and also he lives in my hometown, Montreal, so what's not to like? Let's invite Taras Grescoe up. Thanks very much.
I think the Globe and Mail said this was, Biblioasis was, the first great Canadian publisher of the 21st century, and I tend to concur. And that's one of the reasons I'm here. I also produce beautiful books. They support writers in French, English, other languages, which is really important. And once again, I come back to the fact that they love books, which is why I chose to read a short passage from a book by a Spanish writer called Jorge Carrion. He's from Catalonia in Spain, and his book is called Bookshops. And he had a similar, I lived in Paris in the 90s, and I hang around Shakespeare and Company, and every city that I go to, I seek out bookstores. As Walter Benjamin said, so many cities have revealed themselves to me in the quest, in the search for bookstores and books. That's been my experience. And even if I didn't know about Biblioasis before I came to Windsor, I'm sure in my wanderings I would have stumbled upon this great shop and this great publishing house. So this is from Bookshops by Jorge Carrion. Always a journey. Every bookshop is a condensed version of the world. It is not a flight path, but rather the corridor between bookshelves that unites your country and its language with vast regions that speak other languages. It's not an international frontier you must cross, but a footstep, a mere footstep. You must take to change topography, toponyms, and time. A volume first published in 1976 sits next to one launched yesterday, which has just arrived. A monograph on prehistoric migrations cohabits with a study of the megalopolis in the 21st century. The complete works of Camus precede those of Cervantes. It is in that unique, reduced space where the line by J.V. Foy rings truest. The new excites, and the old seduces. It is not a main road, but rather a set of stairs, perhaps a threshold, maybe not even that. Turn and is what links one genre to another, a discipline or obsession to an often complementary opposite. Greek drama to great North American novels, microbiology to photography, Far Eastern history to bestsellers about the Far West, Hindu poetry to chronicles of the Indies, entomology to chaos theory. I think we've all been in bookstores like this, and they are remarkable places. And Dan Wells and the team at Biblioasis have, in publishing 200 plus titles, created a kind of bookshop of the mind. Browsing their catalog online, I was amazed by the depth and range of the books they publish. So let's once again drink to Dan Wells and Biblioasis. 15 years, many more. Where is Dan Wells? Is he hiding? There you are. And I've got a book too. It's called Possess the Air. It's my seventh book. It's a book that is in a slightly different register about Italy in the 1920s and 30s during the rise of fascism. And it's the story of an Italian-American poet who found a way to protest against the rising tide of authoritarianism by carrying out a symbolic gesture. And I'll give you an idea of what that was all about by reading a couple of pages from the beginning. And then I'll move on so we can get this party started. We have two more readers after this, don't we? We'll get the party started really soon. So, a lucky walker in Rome, weary of dodging gelato eaters and rushing motorini, may be lured out of the teeming streets of Trastevere by the prospect of the upward sloping paving stones of the sycamore-shaded Via Garibaldi. To the right, a side street dead ends in flights of well-worn stone steps, bordered on one side by fortifications built by a 3rd century emperor to repel barbarous Germanic tribes. The staircase ascends alongside crumbling bricks, overgrown with wildflowers and canary grass, to a piazza dominated by a striking monument in luminous travertine limestone. The Fontana dell'Acqua Paola is a confection of the high Baroque, built around 5 niches, divided by columns of red granite and topped by high-perched griffins, lines of stone-cut Latin, and a gossamer iron cross, out of which water gushes into a cerulean basin, as shallow as it is enticing. The pet project of a 17th century pope, it is fed by the same ancient aqueduct that once filled Trastevere's Nomachia, the artificial lake where the Emperor Trajan staged mock naval battles using galleys rowed by real slaves. Taxi drivers know it simply as the Fontanone, the big fountain. The Fontana dell'Acqua Paola, however, is merely the backdrop to a far more impressive spectacle. Crossing the paving stones of the semicircular piazza, the fortunate stroller approaches a curved stone balustrade, which projects like a proscenium over the most sumptuous of playhouses. Just beyond the high canopies of thin-trunked umbrella pines, the first metropolis of the world unscrolls to the limits of peripheral vision. Ecco, Roma. In the foreground, quadrilaterals of weathered stucco and hues of ochre and pink form a cubist jumble. Jostling around the bend in the Tiber that snags Trastevere, the most ancient and authentic of Rome's rioni, or central neighborhoods, like a bishop's crozier. Across the river, the hemispheric roof of the 2 millennia-old Pantheon, the largest dome in the world until well into the 20th century, protrudes from Rococo cupolas, a concrete barnacle cemented fast to the medieval and Renaissance city. And, white as sun-bleached Pauline, the Brescian marble of the Vittoriano, that pretentious monument to the earthiest of Italy's kings, rises against the impressionist smear of blue on the eastern horizon, the foreboding Sabine and Alban hills. The Latin satirist Martial, who owned a villa near the crest of this hill, the Janiculum, wrote of the vista, "From here you can see the 7 lordly hills and measure the whole of Rome." The only reminders that this is the second decade of the 21st century are the cell phone masts that bristle from certain strategic eminences and the occasional contrail of an airplane that scumbles a sky notably unscraped by towers of glass and steel. It is a view that has consoled generations of visitors, suggesting that humans and their problems come and go, but Roma, the urbs aeterna, the caput mundi, the città eterna, will always abide. The city's persistence across the centuries seems to offer a salutary rebuke to an unhealthy obsession with the present. But Rome has never been exempt from history. From the balcony of the Janiculum, observers have watched the flames that leapt up from the temple of Jupiter as Sulla sacked the Forum, the cannonballs that burst in the Piazza Barberini after French gunners dislodged General Garibaldi from the Villa Aurelia, and the columns of smoke that rose from the rubble of the San Lorenzo district after it had been carpet-bombed by flying fortresses in the darkest days of the Second World War. On a warm autumn evening, in the 9th year of the fascist era, families that had wandered up to the Janiculum were witness to another dramatic episode in the city's history. As the sun set on October 3rd, 1931, a dot appeared in the western sky. In the gathering twilight, it quickly resolved itself into a fuselage that sprouted crimson-tipped wings. People stopped to watch its progress, for aircraft were no longer a common sight in Rome. The fascists liked to boast that not even a swallow dared to penetrate the sky over the capital without their permission. Whoever the pilot was, he was flying silently in a controlled downwards glide. Head swiveled as the plane passed above the treetops and crossed the Tiber on what seemed like a certain collision course with the Palazzo where, as the day's newspapers had announced, Il Duce and the leading members of the fascist Grand Council had gathered to work late into the night. In the cockpit, a young man looked out over the rooftops of his hometown and wagged the wings of his plane in triumph. Through a daring act of bravado, he was about to reveal what, for almost a decade, the dictatorship had been striving to conceal from the world. Mussolini didn't know what was about to hit him.
And now I'm going to introduce our next reader, Stéphane Larue. Stéphane has a master's in comparative literature, and he has worked in the restaurant business for the past 15 years. So that's intriguing. It's a coming-of-age story about a young man around the turn of the millennium in Montreal from one of the nice suburbs where all the good people lived, and he'd been to private school, and he's in the city going to school, and he's meeting an awful lot of different people than he ever met before, and new trouble to get into. So that's part of the story, the coming of age. And this is all about music. Like if you're into heavy metal, whatever that is, I don't know. But if you are, you'll find out all you could ever want to know about that era. The singers, the songs, the CDs, it's just like a whole anthology of that type of music, the tapes and everything. Another thing this book is about is friendship, real friendship, not the fake kind of friendship. And he finds out that it's not always the people you think are your friends who are your friends. And he finds out who his real friends are. And finally, this is a book about redemption. And I love it. So I'd like to introduce to you Stéphane Larue.
Good evening, Windsor.
Good evening.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. I will, this is a pretty heavy book. I will read only a very, very short excerpt. That takes place at the end of a chapter that was a thing I thought when I wrote it. I thought it was the most boring thing I ever wrote. And when I submitted the chapter to Eric Larochelière, my publisher, he said, "No, it's 60 pages, but you need 20 more." So it's when the narrator gets his training for the first time when he gets to the restaurant where he's going to be working for a couple of months. And he sees everything he has to do, and that's the end of the chapter. So I'm going to spoil you something, but you'll see. The heat was unbearable. Cooks were blindly chucking empty backups without a thought for the dishwasher struggling to gather it all up. I made several trips back and forth between the kitchen and the dish pit with my mess. I struggled to maintain the pace and keep the machine running. Bébert came back periodically with buspans of dirty dishes from the floor. He said he was helping me out because it was my first shift, but I'd have to get faster. Little by little, I slipped into a sort of trance. As the night went on, my every movement became instinctive. Like a machine, I converted dirty dishes into clean. When I checked the time on my pager, covered by an oily film in the pockets of my soaked pants, I could feel that I'd lost track of time a bit. It was already 10. I thought about the prep kitchen waiting to be cleaned, the counters to be washed, my counters, strewn with veg, flour, puddles of oil, and the giant steam pot full of chicken carcasses I would have to empty and scrub. It was dizzying. I'd never had so much to do and so little time to do it. Since my shift started, there had been a moment's calm, not 1 second when I felt I'd gotten on top of the work and the countless individual tasks piling up, one on top of the other, broken only by periodic crises, each more acute than the last. I went down to the basement to tackle the prep kitchen. After portioning out the stock the way Bébert asked me, I started emptying the steam pot. Little chunks of burning hot chicken crumbled between my fingers as I scrubbed the walls of the giant pot. I had to settle for scraping off the chicken bones with a big perforated metal spoon, the one the cooks called a spider. I threw it all in a big garbage bag. The grease was splattering my face, and I had little bits of bone all over my skin. The smell of kitchen broth at once repelled me and made me hungry. Through the stairwell, I could hear Bébert yelling at me to come pick up the dirty dishes. I ran up the stairs, slowed by the 2 bags slung over my shoulders. Halfway up, One of them split, emitting a juicy gurgling as its contents spilled out behind me. Chicken rib cage, slices of veg, and strips of boiled flesh ran down the staircase like an oozing, oily sea. I froze. My cheeks were burning. I ran a greasy hand over my face as I watched this puddle of waste spread out over the steps. I was seriously tempted to give up and run out the back door. I choked back a tear. I feel like an idiot. The voice of my old boss ran through my head. If your shovel breaks, you use your bare hands. I pulled it together and ran off to get a dustpan. Bieber appeared at the top of the staircase and swore. I was sure I'd be fired on the spot. He leaped over the spill and came back with the empty lettuce bag. Put a garbage bag in there, fast. I did as I was told. He started picking up the boiling hot chicken residue with his bare hands. I put down the dustpan and tried to copy Bieber, tried to go as fast as he was. Throw coarse salt down the steps, that'll absorb the fat, then sweep all this shit and give the step a good mop with degreaser. He let me finish, went to the cooler and came out with a backup of smoked salmon and got back to the front kitchen as if the accident never happened. Thank you.
I'm very delighted to introduce the publisher at ECW Press, Mr. Jack David.
And I'm here to introduce Pauline Holdstock, right over here, who I've never met before. So I was trying to figure out what to say. So I thought what I'd do is get her to say. So this is from an interview she did. She's asked the question, what sorts of stories are you drawn to when searching for inspiration? Never the ordinary, never the everyday. I'm uncomfortable writing stories based on material that's too close to home. I'm a fiction writer who can't lie. A terrible anomaly, and one that causes no end of difficulties for me. So I leave the everyday alone and go where my true inclination takes me to high drama. Technicolor.
Well, I wish I had some Dan stories for you. There's such good ones. But I met Dan for the first time at about 7 o'clock. But so far, everything that I've heard about Dan seems to be true. I had been warned by John Metcalf that Dan was one of the nicest possible people you could hope to meet. And I have a gut feeling that it's true. I'm enormously grateful that my manuscript was taken on by Biblioasis. I was enormously fearful when I first sent it to John Metcalf, one of the fiercest, most curmudgeonly critics in the Canadian literary scene. He had been asking for short stories, if he could have a look at some, if there were enough for a collection. And I said, no, but I do have this manuscript. I don't know what you'll think of it. And posted it off to him. And the manuscript was for this book called Here I Am, which is written in the voice of a 6-year-old boy. When I was preparing this, I found somewhere the elevator pitch for this book. Oh, here it is. After spending a night with his mother's dead body, a 6-year-old boy runs away and boards an ocean liner undetected. Quote, I like my mum. She was my first dead person. You probably want to know what happened. I will tell you. It goes like this. It was Wednesday. It was just my mum and me, and not my dad because he had gone to Ipswich. I was singing. I was getting ready for school like I always do, and I was singing, Be my baby, because it's my mum's favourite. I thought she was still in bed, so I shouted, Mum, get up, when I went past her door. I didn't shout Dad, because I've already told you, he had gone to Ipswich. That's quite far. I went into the kitchen and climbed on the stool and got my cereal down. My snap, crackle and pop had all gone, so there was only boring Weetabix. I got a bowl and put it on the table and put one in and then got the milk. If you pour it round the edge, it makes an island and it doesn't go all soggy on the top. I got a spoon and started eating. I sat down on the stool first, of course. I didn't hear my mum yet, so I called out again and some milk ran down my chin. It was embarrassing. I thought I heard her in the sitting room, and that made me remember I hadn't fed Jackie yet, so I got the tin of birdseed. It says Cadbury's, but it's where we keep his food in case there's a mouse. Not a pet mouse like the ones I killed, but a sort of wild mouse, except it lives in the house. I'm telling you things right now because I'm not sure I want to remember the next bit. I could tell you everything, like the colours on the carpet and the patterns on the curtains and how I killed my mice and what Jackie says when you talk to him and what it says on the side of the Weetabix box and the label in my shorts and what 7 9s are and the front page of the Radio Times. I could tell you everything I know, but then I would be an old man and I would die too, so you would never know about my mum. But you'd already be dead anyway, ha ha. I'd better just tell you. So when I went in the sitting room, I saw my mum in the big armchair. She didn't turn round and say, "Good morning, sunshine." She didn't even move. I said, "Mum, I'm up." And she still didn't turn round. I said, "Can I sit on your lap and eat my cereal?" She was wearing her fluffy dressing gown. It's made of the same stuff as my blanket. She didn't say no, so I went to get my cereal. When I came back, she was still sleeping. Well, you know she wasn't, because I've told you what she was, but I didn't know yet. So I whispered, "Mum, I'm getting up." I put my cereal down. When I looked up, I saw her eyes were open. I laughed because she was just staring like the time she got the telegram. I said, "Mum, stop it." But she didn't. I watched her really hard. I thought she was tricking me. Then I looked at her dressing gown. When I sit on her lap and she does breathing, the fuzzy stuff moves just a little tiny bit. It tickles. I left my cereal on the little table and I climbed up. I put my cheek on the collar. It didn't tickle. I said, "You're dead, aren't you?" That's when I knew. She didn't burst out laughing like she would if it was a trick. But I still had to ask her something because her eyes were open. I said, "What are you looking at?" And she didn't answer. I said, "Mum, what are you looking at?" And she still didn't. So I said, "Mum, can you see me?" And I put my face in front of hers, like right in front. And I looked right in her eyes, like right in. And then I was a bit scared because I couldn't see her and I couldn't see me either in the black bit. I said, "You'll get tired like that, Mum. Go to sleep." But she didn't, so I reached up very carefully so I wouldn't hurt her eyes and put their lids down. It was better then. She looked like someone having a really nice sleep. I think I'll just stop there.
We are very soon we're going to invite you to drink all of our alcohol, I promise. But first, the person who's taught me everything else I know about publishing, our operations manager, Megan Desjardins. Thanks, Vanessa. And thanks to
Pauline for bringing lovable Frankie and his story to Biblioasis. I really love Here I Am. Thanks for being here tonight. Thanks to all the authors for being here tonight. I think I speak for everyone who works at Biblioasis when I say we're proud to work for a publishing house that we believe in. We're lucky to be inspired by great authors and their extraordinary pieces of art. We're happy to be around such amazing people every single day, our colleagues, and we're grateful to be led by somebody so smart, so visionary, and so dedicated. Dan, please join me.
Thank you all for being here. Very much. So I actually had prepared something, but normally, anybody who's been to an event at the store knows that normally I'm the one up here doing the introductions and saying the author's bits. And I was told midway through last week that something else was in the works, and that I didn't really have to do anything at all. And then I thought, well, I better prepare something here, right? At least for the final comments. But I didn't know what I was really in for. And I think I'm just going to wing this one. You've heard about the origins of this press, and I'm not going to belabor them. I'm going to let you guys go and keep the bartender busy. But, what started this was reading, it was a few things. But it was reading An Aesthetic Underground. That was the book. And, it's funny, because I read this book, basically I read this book because it was in a stack beside my bed. And it said in the Aesthetic Underground, I think it was something like the subtitle was A Canadian Literary Memoir or something like that. And I kept thinking, this thing is going to put me to sleep, right? It did not seem possible that a life in Canadian literature was going to be that exciting. And I started it at 10:30 or at 11. And I probably read it till 4 or 5 in the morning. And by the end of it, I knew what I wanted to do. This is the book that inspired me. This is the book that also made me feel like the work I was doing as a bookseller, the work I was doing as a festival organizer, was preparation for being a publisher. So, one more thing. What he talked about in there, the title of the book was An Aesthetic Underground. And I really appreciated the comments that everybody has made about me. It's been really quite wonderful. But what John was talking about there wasn't about individuals. It was about communities. It was about a community of very different writers, different stylists, who, whatever their differences, could bond together into something special. And that's what I took from John's book, and that is very much what I tried to turn Biblioasis into. And I think, if I look at the 5 authors I have here, and Sal, and many of the other authors who aren't present, what we have created is that community. And I think that is probably what I am happiest about. That community also, though, extends to the people who have worked for me presently, but also worked for me in the past, or worked alongside me as well. So that includes John Metcalf, who is one of the key persons without whom this would not be possible. And also Myrna, who has supported everything he's done. And we all know that, this is, as much as anything, a family effort. In the same way that I have my kids here, or 2 of them, because my daughter had an accident about an hour before this event happened, and I think my wife is still at the hospital with her. But, they have supported it too. But it's also people like Dennis Priebe, who is here, and I don't see as much. But without Dennis, who made himself a job in my basement in 2002 or 3, building shelves for $250 a month, $250 a week. And if it wasn't for an accidental phone call or an accidental conversation in a dive bar, I wouldn't have known about his history in publishing. He worked for Arsenal Pulp Press for 25 years on the West Coast, and if it wasn't for this almost accidental, serendipitous connection with this customer of mine, there's no way Biblioasis could have ever been possible. I was an ignorant enthusiast, as I've said repeatedly, whereas Dennis actually knew what he was doing. And you need people who know what they're doing, and without him, we wouldn't be here either. And I could go down the line. I could talk about Tara Murphy, who is now a publisher in England, who started with us. Or, people like Chris Anderchuk, who was with us for 7 years, or Grant Monroe, or many other people who have been with us and who aren't there anymore. Or our current staff, like Megan and Vanessa, who you've met, but there's also other people behind the counter, like Theo and Sharon and Chloe and Christina and I'm sure I'm going to forget, and Tina in the bookstore. And I'm going to forget people, but this is also part of that community, and I am really, really very grateful to have them alongside me. So thank you. When I started, or when I was first at Bookfest Windsor, I used to talk about bums in the seats. I was most worried about the fact that we would put on these shows, these events, and nobody would show up. And I'm really also deeply grateful that all of you did. So thank you very much. And please, have a good night. Buy some books. Have a great night. Have a book salad.
You've been listening to selected readings and stories from the 15th anniversary celebration for Biblioasis Press. Join us next week for a taste of 2 new mystery novels on All Right in Sin City.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.